with the exceptions of a former British Army infantryman named Noah Perkins, who terrorized the residents of Carberry, Manitoba, and an elderly hermit named Daniel Barber, who lived in an underground burrow near Copetown, Ontario, who was found wearing a mysterious agate-encrusted gold ring with the name R.C. Pat stamped on the inside. The next wildman to appear in Canadian papers was a resident of what was referred to as Valdez Island, British Columbia. Although there is a Valdez Island near Nanaimo, BC, one of the many Gulf Islands which lie off the southeastern shores of Vancouver Island, contemporary pieces on this wildman story indicate that the island in question was located off the northern tip of Vancouver Island, in the vicinity of Alert Bay on Cormorant Island. It is possible that the Valdez Island referred to was Quadra Island, which lies at the eastern end of the northerly Johnstone Strait, which contemporary writings indicate was referred to as Valdez Island at least as late as 1903. However, Quadra Island lies a full 70 miles east of Alert Bay, suggesting that the incident may have taken place on yet another Valdez Island further to the west. The source for this tale was an unnamed traveler who related the following account to journalists at Ladysmith, BC, a town between Nanaimo and present-day Duncan, which, incidentally, lies a mere 8 miles southwest of the aforementioned Valdez Island of present day. One night in mid-October 1905, so the story goes, a family by the name of Pitcock settled down for a late supper in their remote homestead on Valdez Island. At about 10 o'clock, their dinner was interrupted by the appearance of a ghastly face in the window. The face was covered with black hair, reported an article in the Nanaimo Daily News, only a portion of its skin being visible. Apparently cognizant that he was being observed, the figure uttered a diabolical scream and vanished. The young men of the Pitcock family, rifles in hand, promptly searched the vicinity of the house for any sign of their uninvited visitor. The only clue they managed to uncover was a pair of large footprints impressed into the soft dirt of the flower bed beneath the kitchen window. Twice during the night, the article contended, the family heard a scream similar to that uttered by the possessor of the face that had been seen at the window. The next day, a careful watch was kept, but there were no signs of the creature, although naked footmarks were found along the creek that passes the Pitcock house. Undeterred, the Pitcock men held another vigil the following night, positioning themselves behind a stack of hay. About 10:30, maintained the Nanaimo article, horrible yells were heard in the direction of the creek, and after waiting for about an hour, 2 of the boys resolved to go and search along the creek. They had gone up the stream about a half-mile when the light of a lantern carried by one revealed a tall man, entirely naked, except for a few rags hanging from a belt at the waist. His body was covered with long hair, and the face that which was seen peering through the window the previous evening. Nearly paralyzed with fear, one of the men managed to level his rifle at the creature. In response, the wild man threw himself into the creek, swam to the opposite shore, and cried, "Don't shoot," before darting into the bush and out of sight. The Nanaimo article concluded by stating that 2 half-breeds of Alert Bay claimed to have seen the same man a few days after, and that the Pitcock boys were adamant that the creature they saw could not have been a bear. Later that winter, 2 more articles were published on the island's elusive wildman. The second, which appeared in the January 2, 1906 issue of the Vancouver Daily World, was a brief paragraph which simply affirmed that the creature still loomed large in the consciousness of the local populace. The first, printed in the December 30th, 1905 issue of the Vancouver Daily Province, was the product of an interview with Mike King, the lumber baron who came face to face with the wildman in present-day Strathcona Provincial Park around the turn of the 20th century, who had returned to his northern haunts after concluding a business venture in Mexico in order to celebrate New Year's Eve with his friends. A year and a half earlier, King had told reporters that the natives with whom he traveled had their own ideas as to the nature of the Vancouver Island wildman, supposing him to be the descendant of an ape that had absconded from a Spanish ship over a century earlier, and the Nootka maiden he had subsequently captured. This time, King proffered another, slightly different version of the theory, also gleaned from conversations with island natives. As a result of diligent inquiry among the Indians residing in the vicinity of Englishman's River, the article declared, one of the wildest and least frequented portions of Vancouver Island, where the Mowgli was seen a number of times, Mr. King has unearthed a new and somewhat startling theory to account for the origin of the strange being. This theory he made public today for the first time, although he has implicitly believed in it all along, and so do all the Indians in that district. Some 28 years ago, a large ship was wrecked on Vancouver Island, some distance north of Englishman's River. Some of the crew perished, and some were saved. The survivors were afterwards massacred by the Indians, and to punish the latter, a warship was sent up from Victoria, but that is another story. In the cargo of this ship was a full-grown gorilla, one of the few ever captured, which was being taken to England for the zoological gardens. The animal's cage was washed off the deck and broken in the surf, allowing the animal to escape. It was seen a number of times afterward on the shore by the survivors. For a number of years following, the gorilla created consternation and horror among some of the Indian camps, and the natives tell gruesome tales of the animal having carried off a young squaw, who was not seen afterward. The Indians assert that the Wildman is the descendant of the escaped gorilla. The statement that the ship wrecked some 20 years ago indicates that the event in question occurred around 1877. Although this author was unable to find any information regarding a historical shipwreck, associated Indian massacre, and government retaliatory action which took place on the east coast of Vancouver Island in the 1870s, the narrative described vaguely resembles a series of events that took place in the spring of 1863, chronicled by author Chris Arnett in his 1999 book, The Terror of the Coast. That April, a German immigrant named Frederick Marx decided to relocate with his family from Waldman Island to Main Island, the former being one of the Gulf Islands in Washington state, and the latter being a Gulf Island in British territory, about 11 miles to the northwest. To accomplish this task, Marx secured the use of 2 boats, one of them a vessel called the Bellacula, owned by a man named Henry, and the other a dugout canoe, owned by his business partner, Christian Mayer. Mark's wife and their 5 youngest children traveled in Henry's boat. Marx himself, along with his 15-year-old married daughter, Caroline Harvey, traveled in the smaller canoe. During the voyage, the vessels were beset by a sudden storm. Marx and Caroline decided to wait out the tempest on the southern shores of Saturna Island, while Henry opted to take Mark's wife and young children to his own place on nearby Pender Island. After building a fire on the beach, Marx and his daughter were discovered and slaughtered by a band of Lamolchi Cowichan natives who coveted the household goods they had brought on shore. The natives then destroyed the canoe with axes and threw their victims' bodies into the sea. That accomplished, they returned to their home village and spread word of their exploit. Around the same time, a party of natives, acting on the dream of one of its members, fired on a tent of sleeping white men on nearby Pender Island, mortally wounding one of their targets. One of the barrage's recipients, who had been shot in the leg, crawled from the tent, wrested a rifle from the nearest assailant, and drove the remainder into the forest. In order to obtain justice for these murders, British Columbia's Governor James Douglas dispatched a Royal Navy gunboat called the HMS Forward to the Gulf Islands. After investigating the scenes of the crimes, the naval crew set out in search of the suspected murderers, and captured 2 near Salt Spring Island on their way home from a potlatch. The Navy men then proceeded to a Lamolchi village on Cupper Island, now Penellicut Island, where other of the murderers were believed to have taken refuge. At the approach of the steamer, the native women and children fled into the woods, and the warriors took up strategic positions overlooking the beach. Through an interpreter, the gunboat's captain, Lieutenant Commander Horace Lascelles, ordered the village chief to deliver the suspects into his custody within a certain time frame. When the chief failed to meet his demand, Lascelles bombarded the village to destruction. The natives fired back with their rifles, and one of their bullets struck and killed 16-year-old sailor Charles Glidden, the only British serviceman ever killed in action in British Columbia. The 1860s saw other instances of British retaliatory action in response to native crimes in the Pacific Northwest, the most notable being the Royal Navy's 1864 bombardment of Nootka villages on Flores Island northwest of present-day Tofino, perpetrated in response to the murders of 4 merchant sailors at Clayoquot Sound. The Gulf Island incident, however, sometimes referred to as the Lamolchi War, is the only action of which this author is aware, which took place in the waters east of Vancouver Island, into which the Englishman River drains. To the best of this author's knowledge, no guerrillas were on board either the HMS Forward at the time of its Gulf Island campaign, nor on Henry's dugout canoe at the time of Marx and Harvey's murders. After outlining his revised theory as to the nature of the Vancouver Island Wildman, Mike King provided a thorough description of the creature that he encountered, including details which did not appear in earlier accounts of his run-in. The theory, he said of his gorilla-human hybrid hypothesis, seems to me to be the only way to account for the origin of the strange being that I saw a little over a year ago. For even if a man lived in a wild state from birth, he could not have assumed the ape-like attributes possessed by this creature which I saw. I came up by accident, and was only about 25 feet away when it caught sight of me. The Mowgli, or whatever you like to call it, was squatted down like a monkey beside a little stream. It was washing a kind of onion that we prospectors sometimes eat when we run short of provisions. I thought it was a bear at first, but when it heard me and straightened up, I brought my rifle up to my shoulder, for it was the strangest sight I ever expect to set eyes on. Imagine meeting in the depths of a lonely forest an animal in the shape of a man, standing over 6 feet high and covered all over with long, coarse black hair, which on some portions of the body was a foot long. The forehead was low and retreating, and its small eyes glared at me in surprise for an instant. Just below the eyes, the hair on the face of the creature was short, but everywhere else it was long and shiny, and on the hand the hair hung down below the finger ends. The being stood quite straight for a moment in surprise, and seemed to me to weigh about 240 pounds. If it had taken one step toward me, I would have sent a bullet through it, for I had it covered with my rifle. But after glaring at me for a moment, it uttered a cry, a half-human sort of grunt, and grasping a branch nearby, hoisted itself up the bank of the creek and ran away through the underbrush, slightly bending as it did so, with the speed of a startled deer. I examined the creature's footprints afterward. Its feet were short and very broad. I noticed the heel came back almost to the point, like that of a gorilla. The armful of wild onions that it had been cleaning at the little stream were as nicely done up as if a human being had prepared them.